Hey, look what you've done. You're a pink pony girl. You dance at the club. Hey kids, welcome back to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza. This is yet another disco situation. I don't think that's actually a disco song. Don't know what it was, but I've had a decent amount of caffeine and I'm still drinking it. So Lord knows what's about to happen. If you're new here, how this works. I pick prompts out of my disco ball of fun. So I reach in here, grab a prompt, and then I tell you about the book that prompt represents to me. Maybe this will help you find a book you haven't heard of before, or just books. We're just talking about books. In case you were wondering, Winnie is right there. I'm sure at some point she will make an appearance, but right now she's just staring at me, just observing. And then Cheese. Bet you didn't guess that one. Cheese is always in that spot. This is the official Cheese area. If you ever need to find Cheese, that's where she is. Let's do this. We are going to pick 6 prompts and we're going to talk about 6 books and we're going to make this happen fresh. You ready? Let's do this. A book that made you give up on an author. A book that made me give up on an author. Ugh, I know. This is a little bit more recent, but How My Neighbor Stole Christmas from Meghan Quinn. This was the second Christmas romance that I picked up from this author. I believe they are mainly a romance author, but the first book I read from them was a Christmas novella that was Resting Scrooge Face, which is a Christmas small town, 2 people kind of second chance where our main character has moved away from this small town. And then when she moves back, she's trying to avoid running into her ex, the one that broke her heart. When she starts receiving letters, the local mailman starts bringing her letters. You learn pretty quickly that there is some sort of behind the scenes thing going on in this small town where it has been orchestrated that her and her previous love are writing letters to each other without knowing that's who they're corresponding with. It was fine. It felt a little lacking. I wasn't a huge fan, but I didn't hate it. I saw absolutely everywhere this book and was interested, right? It says it's very How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I was thinking the Jim Carrey version, but that's what I grew up with in my childhood. It was supposed to be like a spicy romance that was inspired by How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This was borderline unreadable. I know a lot of people that made it a pretty decent amount of the way into it. I think I only hit like the 30% mark or something like that. I was not having fun. It felt like a cartoon in the worst way possible. Everyone was like a caricature of themselves, was making really strange decisions. And then I started seeing slightly spoilery stuff about spicy scenes that were just cringing yet making people laugh uncontrollably. Basically, nothing was giving what it should have been giving. I was not having fun. I don't think Meghan Quinn and we don't mesh well when it comes to that author's romantic voice. That's totally fine. Not every author is for every person, and I just have to realize that I probably shouldn't pick up anything from this author in the future. I don't really like their romances, and life's too short to read books you're just not into. All right, next up. Oh, I guess it just picked itself. One just came flying out. Take place in a bookshop or library. I tend to read a lot of books that take place in a bookshop or library, but I feel like most bookish people do. We love a bookshop and a library. So if you tell us the story takes place there, I mean, I'm in, I'm in. Do you know what book I haven't talked about in a while and I really enjoyed? It actually made my top books the year I read it, which was 2023, I believe is when I read this book. That is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. This is the beginning of, I believe, a trilogy that is taking place in a fantasy world where there is one major city and everything else is just dust and desert. And so for the most part, you either live in the city, struggle to get by, live outside the city, Sorry, Winnie just bumped the camera. Live outside the city, struggle even harder to get by. But in this major city, in this world, there is a library, and the library itself is magnificent. It is vast, just absolutely endless. There are rooms and mazes and puzzles within them. It has everything you could ever want to know within its walls. An abundance of knowledge, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Now, in this book, we are following our main character, and she has grown up in the dust. One day, an opposing force comes and just decimates the small town that she lives in, and she ends up going on a trek from where she lived through this desert to the one large city in the world. And she almost immediately starts proving that she is so much more than she should be. Not that she should be anything, but she proves that she's brave, she's loyal, she has a strong backbone. She's going to amount to things in life, no matter how many people stand in her way. When she gets to this one large city, through circumstances, she ends up in the library in a program in order to one day become a librarian. And her story goes from there. We also simultaneously are getting the story of a young man who has grown up within the library. And he and a group of his siblings live this very secluded life in this very secluded area surrounded by books. It's all they know. This is the kind of story that is so masterfully crafted. It twists and turns, and you're following these two points of view, wondering how they're going to connect, wondering why we're following these two points of view, and moving through time with these characters, learning life lessons. I really, really enjoyed this. I loved the setting of this library that just contains all knowledge, any knowledge, every knowledge, but also the librarians themselves, the guards and security mechanisms within the library, the history of the library. If you want a book, a fantasy book where the world is the library, this is a great one to pick up. All right, what's next? Winter horror. Do you know what I'm going to pick? It's a book you've probably never heard of before. The Shining by Stephen King. I will say, as someone that is very early into their Stephen King journey, I'm still a novice. I haven't had that many finished books under my belt. But as far as someone who's going to do a cold setting, because Mr. Stephen King loves to set his horror stories in cold places. He really likes Maine. I'm pretty sure it's because he lives there. But this is actually something that I was a little apprehensive to pick up, seeing as how I've seen the movie about 1,000 times. The movie is very beloved and seen as this artistic, wonderful thing, but it is pretty well known that Stephen King is not a fan of the movie. He does not like the adaptation to this book, and having read the book, I understand why. The book is incredibly different than the movie. It has the same skeleton, but everything else inside that body is completely different. This is the story of a family. There is the young son Danny, the father Jack, and the mother Wendy, and they are all moving to a very secluded location when Jack, the father, gets a job being the wintertime caretaker at a resort hotel situation. He and his family will be the only people here. They're basically here to make sure that the boiler gets turned on every day and that nothing catastrophic happens while everyone else is gone. Jack is going to use this time to work on some novel, but there is a dark undercurrent to this family. They've had troubles in the past and they're kind of running away from it. Danny is the main character, our 5-year-old Danny, our sweet, sweet Danny, who has the shining. He has a touch of the supernatural, a touch of the psychic. His doors are more open to something ooky spooky happening to him. He's just a little more sensitive to these things. The hotel that they're staying at, the Overlook, is full of ghosts and history, and we watch this family completely unravel. I really enjoyed this book. It's taking place in this very secluded place, this giant hotel, but yet these people are the only ones around. When they finally get cut off from being able to leave with this giant blizzard that shows up, it's cold, it's isolated, it's spooky. I really enjoyed The Shining, and I get why this is a lot of people's favorite Stephen King. All right, what's next? retelling you recommend. I mean, I feel like the one that I'm going to go with is the first one that pops in my head. I love a retelling, but I'm also very partial to certain retellings. And I feel like I tend to gravitate towards Beauty and the Beast retellings. And I would say one of my favorite Beauty and the Beast retellings is going to be Entreat Me, and that is by Grace Draven. Grace Draven tends to write more fairy tale feeling fantasy romances. They just have some sort of like undercurrent in both the writing and the setting and the characters that just feels like a fairy tale. I really have enjoyed a lot of Grace Draven's books, but Entreat Me is just magnificent. It is by far one of the best Beauty and the Beast retellings I've ever read. I think that is because it definitely does a little flipping and switching and moving things around. This is actually the story of Lavaine, and Lavaine is the older sister of our usual protagonist. See, Lavaine's sister is beautiful and young and flighty, and she unfortunately caught the eye of someone nefarious. So Lavaine is trying everything in her power to keep her younger sister safe. She also is just trying to keep their family afloat because her father is absolutely worthless, and Lavaine, although previously married, is now a widow, and so she's just trying her best to keep everybody afloat. Lavaine is just trying her best, and everybody is making it really hard for her. When one day her younger sister meets a equally beautiful young man and they run off into the sunset together. Lavaine is not having this. Absolutely not. She is so tired of having to clean up other people's messes, and this is just not good, and so she goes chasing after her younger sister to the great estate that her younger sister and her younger sister's beautiful boyfriend have run off to. The head of this estate, the father of Lavaine's younger sister's new boyfriend, is Ballard, and he has been cursed. He has a curse that not only is upon him, but upon the manor itself. He has been trying for a very long time to remove this curse, and this is the romance between Lavaine and Ballard, because, see, in most Beauty and the Beast retellings, we would be following our beautiful younger sister, and honestly, in most fairy tales, our beautiful younger sister and her beautiful boyfriend would be at the forefront of this story. But instead, we now have Lavaine, who's prickly and bristly and just not putting up with nonsense, and we have Ballard, who's grumpy and cursed and kind of a recluse. These two people, who are just covered in spines, brush up against each other and sparks fly. I really, really enjoyed this take on Beauty and the Beast. I really liked having these people be... Sorry, Winnie's head just hit me in the butt. I really liked these people being our main characters. I really like Grace Draven as an author. And as far as retellings go, I think Entreat Me takes the cake for one of my favorite retellings. Number 4. Book that was recommended to you the most. I think I got this one last time. Let's try and pick something different this time. I think I picked a book that I haven't talked about on here in a while, and that is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I feel like when The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue came out from this author, there was kind of a resurgence in their backlist. Like, that happens every single time any author writes a book that is beloved. Everybody's like, gimme some more of that. And so this was one of those books that not only do I feel like a lot of people thought I would enjoy, but I feel like since then a lot of people have asked me if I think they will enjoy it. So we're going to pick this one. I feel like a lot of people want to put this in with dark academia, and I could be influenced to put my vote in on that, but I don't necessarily feel like this feels like dark academia. You know how they keep remaking superhero movies and they try and do it in different ways? Instead of the same, they try and ground them, make them more realistic, make them grittier, make them feel like a noir. Like every other year they come out with like a new Batman movie, and this time it's even more realistic than the last time. They're trying to ground superheroes into reality. I would say this is the most successful superpowers into reality that I've ever experienced. This is the story of Victor and Eli, and they were college roommates, but after a near-death experience, their eyes are opened to some possibilities. These two people that start off as friends have this event that completely changes not only them, but their friendship as well. And at the opening of this book, we are starting in their narrative after their friendship has dissolved. Both Victor and Eli have ended up on polar opposite sides of this. I don't even know how to put it. Polar opposite sides of this thing that is happening. They have this knowledge that not everyone has. It's these two people who used to be friends and know how to hurt each other in the most vicious of ways and have reasons to absolutely hate each other. This is a really interesting story. I was absolutely riveted. I have not picked up the sequel, and I've heard it's not necessary, that you can stop right here. It does feel whole and complete, and you don't have to continue on with the story. What's next? I'm having the hardest time unwrapping these. I did way too good of a job making them into teeny tiny little triangles. Forced proximity or stuck together. This honestly usually works for me in romance, but is that what we want to talk about? I know which one I'm going to talk about. I feel like I try and sprinkle this book in every once in a while. If you are a fan of fantasy romance, you need to pick up Bound to the Battle God by Ruby Dixon. This is one of this author's longest books, and Ruby Dixon is an incredibly prolific author. She has 1 million books out there, and some of them you've probably heard of. The one with the big blue aliens, you heard of it? It was taking booktube, book social media by storm not too long ago. I have an okay time with Ruby Dixon's sci-fi alien romance nonsense. They're a funny, fun, good time. But I really enjoy this author's fantasy romance. And Bound to the Battle God, which is the first book in the Aspects and Anchors series, is by far my favorite. It is the kind of book where it starts off fine. I don't think it has a rocky start, but it has just an average, okay, I'm enjoying this, I'm here for this kind of start. But as the book went on, I was so flipping invested. I remember listening to this on audiobook, and at the climax, the big crescendo of what we've been waiting for, I could no longer function. I was sitting there listening, staring at a wall, like could not move from the spot until we got past that part. I was invested. This is the story of Faith. Did I just pull that out of my butt? It is Faith. This is the story of Faith, and she's an average girl living in an average world, working her average job, when one day in her apartment, she starts hearing strange noises coming from the apartment next door. But that apartment is supposed to be empty. It sounds like drums. It keeps getting louder. And so eventually Faith is like, okay, I gotta see what's going on next door. So she goes over there and oops, gets accidentally sucked into a fantasy world. She is dropped into this world, and immediately this is just not the place that she wants to be. But through circumstances, Faith ends up becoming the anchor to a god. See, in this world, every period of time, I don't know, 100 years, I don't remember how many years, the gods are split up into sections and thrown down onto the mortal plane, and then they have to fight it out until only one version of themselves is left alive. And in order to stay tethered to the mortal world, they need an anchor. So our poor Faith, through circumstances, ends up becoming the anchor, and she is forced to stay with, this is our forced proximity. She literally can't get too far away from this man, or it is physically painful. Aaron, the god of war. And he is awful. He is so full of himself and arrogant and just the worst. And Faith is not having a good time hanging out with Aaron. But these two have to go on an adventure, finding other gods, fighting other gods. There are other anchors, just traveling through this fantasy world. It was so much fun. Ruby Dixon not only can have a spicy good time, because spicy things happen, but also I love when she really sinks her teeth in and starts creating a fantasy world. It's not necessarily hard to understand, but there is a lot of ingredients in the soup, is how we'll put it. It just works so well. I loved this. I was incredibly invested. And if you're looking for a fantasy romance that honestly was a very good audiobook, but also is just a fun book in general, Bound to the Battle God. Absolutely loved it. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Last one, you ready? A book where you didn't feel the chemistry. The Undermining of Twyla and Frank. This was a little disappointing for me. It's not a bad book by any means, but it feels like a run-of-the-mill fantasy romance. This is the story of, obviously, Twyla and Frank, and they live in a fantasy world and are both members of a fantasy police force. They've been partners and best friends for a very long time when they stumble upon something that shouldn't exist, and they then have to not only keep it secret, but keep it safe. And the whole while they're dealing with not only their feelings about themselves feels, meaning each other, but the feelings that other people have for them. And it's kind of a friends, it's a friends to lovers situation, but I just didn't really necessarily feel the chemistry in this one because to me, there was no real reason that Twyla and Frank had not gotten together sooner. She is a widow. He is divorced. They have both been that way for a very long time. If there was chemistry, it probably should have shown up sooner. Maybe if they made it feel like there was chemistry, they were just both oblivious to it because it was so comfortable. I don't know. Maybe that's what we were going for. This was fine. I think I was mostly disappointed because the first book in the series, this one, The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy, was so flipping good. This is the story of, obviously, Hart and Mercy, and they exist in a fantasy world, which it's really hard to explain because it sounds absolutely crazy, but there's gods and demigods, and there's portals to different fantasy worlds. There's zombies, and there's talking animal critters, and it sounds absolutely bananas, but it totally works. This is kind of a play on that you've got mail trope where people are sending letters back and forth, but Hart and Mercy are two people who unfortunately have to interact with each other on a somewhat regular basis because Hart is a police officer who goes into this magical realm and kills zombies and then has to take the dead zombies back to the Undertaker so that the bodies are properly disposed of so they don't get up and walk around again. And the person in charge of the Undertaking funeral home, whatever it is Mercy. Technically, her father owns it, but Mercy's in charge. These two had a very prickly first meeting, and now every time they interact with each other, it just doesn't go well. Well, one day, Hart is feeling really down on himself, and he pens a letter, not expecting it to ever be read by anyone else. He slips it into the world, and somehow it magically gets delivered to Mercy. These two start writing letters back and forth and form a connection. This book was so good. And when I tell you the last part of this book, I was sobbing, absolutely sobbing. And then you close the book with a big goofy smile on your face. I was so worried that this author was not going to give me the ending I needed. And it's a little dicey, but believe me when I tell you, this book is definitely worth the read. It's the kind of fantasy world that you're never really going to get a grasp on, but it's not necessary because you're really just here to follow the story of Hart and Mercy. You don't need to know how the world works. It's just a romance that just happens to be taking place in a fantasy world. I loved this. And so that's why this, when I didn't feel the chemistry, it felt incredibly disappointing. I know this author can do it. They just didn't pull it through this time. But that being said, I don't think I'm done with this series because I know that this author can do it. And I'm just hoping for that magic that I got in the first book again. But that, kids, is 6 books that I haven't talked about in a while. And I hope you found something that tickled your fancy that you might want to pick up soon. If you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe. I hope you're reading good books out there wherever you are. And I'd love to hear about them. And we'll see you next time.